Thank you for joining us and welcome to Better Together Live, where we create helpful community connections when it matters most. I am Yamile, your host and the Community Relations Coordinator here at Therapy Work. And today I'm pleased to be joined by Heather Johanson and Laura Kimpton from Lamborn Advocacy. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, thank you. We started Better Together Live to highlight local resources like you, like Lumbar Advocacy, to offer expanded access to support for our local communities. So this is really, really great that you guys have time to talk to me today. So before I throw all the questions and ask you all those questions, can you talk to us a little bit about yourselves? We can start with Laura, if you want.
So I started in education by homeschooling my children. I did that for a number of years and loved it, enjoyed every minute of it, but then had to go back to work, so enrolled them in a public school, and I became a special education teacher in a special day class. I did that for a number of years. I started off at the pre-KK level and went all the way through transition age, so 22. I then went back and got my administrative credential and my master's and worked for districts in the special education office, mostly as a program supervisor. When I became a little disheartened by that position and a little frustrated with my job requirements, Renee, who was the lady who started our advocacy, had asked me to come and join her. So I joined her about 5 years ago and have been working as a special education advocate ever since.
Wow, 5 years ago. That's awesome.
Yeah.
On time. Yeah.
Nice.
Super. How about you, Heather?
Oh, it was when teaching and education wasn't like, if you had told me when I was younger, this is where you were going to go, I would have been like, I don't know about that. And I just sort of fell that way. In college, I taught preschool, and then I was working in an after school program. And then I found this great program after I graduated from high school where I could get my multiple subject teaching credential, right out of college. So I went and taught elementary school for 7 years, which was a great experience. I got to go teach abroad for a couple of years, which was great for the 20s. And then when I came kind of back from that adventure, I'm my real calling had always been special education. Mm-hmm. I've always was super interested in learning disabilities and dyslexia and all these different pieces. So I started down that pathway and did grad school, and I got a job, what they call as an intern credential. So all of a sudden I had this huge caseloads of kids at 2 different elementary schools and was getting my master's at the same time. So it was definitely an uphill, here's my learning curve. It was just
right.
was amazing. And I did a ton of work with dyslexia. I worked a lot with Charles Armstrong and Linda Mood Bell, and really and then I became a reading specialist for a little while. And then I ended up scooting over to a high school district and worked in high school for 13 years as an ed specialist.
13 years. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I worked as an ed specialist, and then I took over the department for a number of years and did inclusion at that age group. And it was a really great experience to be able to do those littles all the way through that high school age of kid. Mm-hmm. And then I, like Laura, was kind of I'm ready for that next thing. I'm not getting to do kind of the deeper work I want to do.
Yeah.
And I tried to do some private work, just doing executive functioning tutoring, but it wasn't quite getting to what I wanted. And then Renee, she's so I hear that you're not in the district as much, and I'm thinking about retiring. And I'm
come.
And then
Yes.
Here we are. So, and I loved working with Renee when I'd have her in IEP meetings because of her super collaborative style. She's just lovely to have in a meeting. And I think that's probably Laura too. She just enjoyed working with her. And here we sit.
Clearly, you guys have extremely experience with dealing and working with children of all age. So this is wonderful. So let's start talking about, what does Lamborn Advocacy do? Either one.
I can take that question. So like Heather was saying, our style is really very collaborative. What we try and do is to branch that the bridge between parents and the school. And the first thing we always do is try and get to know the child as best as possible, to know their strengths, their weaknesses, where their gaps are in their educational program, what we could do to strengthen that program, how, what supports, what services, what we can do. We really, really try to maximize the amount of services or supports that the child can get in school, whether that's special education, whether that's speech language, behavior, OT, PT, whatever it is, to really maximize and strengthen their program as much as possible so that they can have the best possible, meet the best possible outcomes. It's really working with the districts to get those things and to know how to ask for them and to know what arguments to base those requests on, because there isn't anywhere really for parents to go to learn about special education. It's really one of those things you learn by doing. And so we use our experience to know how to form the questions, how to base our requests, so the child can be as successful as possible in school.
That's right. And that's the conversation we had with Heather a while ago. Parents, most of the parents, they do not know where to go for this. And the fact that you guys are there to advocate for that child, it's a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Wonderful work. Yeah.
Part of that job as well is, I feel, parent education. My goal in the end is for parents to understand the system, to really be able to do this by themselves, but to educate them along the way in terms of, why something might not be possible or why something else might be possible, so that they can go on and continue the work as their child goes through the school system. But it's really to give them a good understanding of how special education works and why it works in the way
a good foundation. Yeah, that's great. That is great. Who do you serve in our community?
So basically, we kind of serve anyone from 3 to 22, because that's kind of where special education serves. I mean, I think Laura and I both have clients. We have preschool clients and we have students in post-secondary that are looking to launch into their next phase of life. So we really serve like that whole community. We work with Laura's in the East Bay. I'm kind of in the South Bay, but between the two of us, we serve we cover the greater Bay Area for sure, especially in our world right now. It's pretty easy to beam in just about anywhere. So
it helps in a way.
It does. We were both talking, like, we spend so much less time in our cars now. Like,
right? We're saving money in gas, that's for sure.
Yeah, but that's pretty much who we work with. I mean, our clients are the students, but I think we also think of that family as a whole system we're working with a lot of the time. Like, we definitely we really our focus is on this kiddo and getting them what they need to be super successful. But I think it's also supporting that family around them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you need to do that. And in therapy, we do the same. In order for this child, this client that we have, who is a young client, in order for him to achieve, success, the family needs to be involved, for sure. Yeah, that's how it is. What is the most common challenge you run into it?
Honestly, I think there's a lot of mistrust. I think there's miscommunications, understandings, and mistrust. And a lot of what we do is to try and bridge that. We always do that in the most collaborative way possible. The reality is these families live in those communities. They normally have another child within the district. The parents don't want to antagonize the district, but they're very frustrated, and they feel that they're not making as much gains, or they're not getting the services that they want for them. And so I think a lot of mistrust develops. Sometimes school districts don't explain things very well. So parents are left with lots of unanswered questions. And so our job really is to explain why. And if there's something that the district has said no to that we really feel that child needs, is, like I said before, to make that argument why. But it's also to build those bridges. The reality is that child is going to be in the district, that family lives in that school district, and we really want to try and build the bridges so at least the children can benefit from it. And that's, I think, the benefit of both Heather and I working in districts is that we know a lot of the people.
You understand how the system works. That's right. I mean,
and we can call the districts and the people, the directors or the program supervisors, and explain the situation and give them a different perspective, and help. We're not mending the relationships. The end goal really is just to get that child the most benefit possible, but to really try and bridge the miscommunications or the mistrust.
That's right. Can you talk about your direct services?
So I would like to kind of say we offer a spectrum of services. We have all different types of clients that need kind of all different kinds of needs. So kind of on one end, we definitely just do consultation. Like I have one mom that we kind of have a standing date once a month, and she just sort of downloads and we troubleshoot, and she's like, okay, talk to you in a month. And that's just kind of
makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, that's what she needs from me. Whereas like we can go to the point where we are writing emails for the family, kind of communicating to the district for them. We go to the IEPs with them. We really like get down in there and hold hands.
You're really involved. Yeah.
Really involved. Like, so it really, it's very individualized, shocker, for each family on what they need. And it kind of can be, like I said, from a very, like, I talk to some clients probably once a year to ones that I probably talk to almost once a day. So it just sort of depends on what's needed for that case.
Do you get to go and actually observe the kiddo in his environment?
Before COVID, we did. It was
right?
one of like my favorite, like when we take on a new client, our first thing is to really get to know that kiddo so that we're not missing anything we feel like they need, like something that's been overlooked. So part of that usually is going and doing an observation and spending time seeing them in the school environment. Haven't done that in a year, but
it's gonna come back.
Yeah.
For all of us. Right?
We
totally.
can do meetings. They're not quite as informative as in person, but you know, in terms of I always, you know, like to know my students as much as possible. So either a Zoom meeting or I'll do a FaceTime meeting with parents where they'll, you know, talk to the students just so I can get to know them as a person as much as possible. Sometimes just reading about them is a very one-dimensional view. So however I can get to know that child better is a good way of going.
It's a good way. That's correct. Yeah. What are the difference between a private and a public school when it comes to serving and supporting your client?
Okay, so there's actually three types of school. There is the public school, which obviously everyone knows. It's where they can offer special education services and accommodations, but while that student would have access to the general education curriculum and general education peers.
Okay.
There are private schools which are, you know, privately paid for, but they don't offer special education services. They sometimes can help offer accommodations or will support the child, but there's no direct special education services.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then there's non-public schools, which are basically private schools that offer special education services and have all the support. So they'll have speech language therapists, behavior support, OT, they'll have all this other supports. It's just in a more restrictive environment, normally with smaller class sizes, but then they don't have access to general education peers.
To general education.
In terms of the spectrum of special education is considered to be more effective, but sometimes that's what the child needs, you know, in order to make gains. But those are the three types of schools. So lots of times parents will say, I want my child to go to a private school, and it's no, you want your child to go to a non-public school. And so it's just a little, one of the many little special education language.
I didn't know that. Yeah, there were two different types. Okay.
So that's, and we don't really deal with private schools.
Private.
There's really, you know, maybe on the odd occasion we'll have a student that's placed there for other needs, whether it's social, emotional, or things like that. But so that's a very rare situation. Normally we work with the public schools and non-public schools.
Understand. Thank you. Can you explain how the IEP and 504 process work?
So
and I know I asked you that before, Heather.
Yeah, Laura and I were sort of joking, like, well, do they have 5 hours?
Right? I could.
So we kind of talked about it, like, I'll kind of take the 504 and then she'll take the IEP. So kind of to talk about the continuum of services, right? Like usually kind of where you start. So I mean, if you're kind of starting to notice, like, there's something with my kiddo and it just doesn't feel right, like we would kind of, like, if you've never done any piece at all, like we'd say, go do like a meeting, an SST with your school, right? Kind of get that process, get the conversation started. And then let's say you go out and you do like a private assessment and you get that private assessment back and you're like, oh, looks like my kiddo is really struggling with attention. They have ADHD and attentive. They've got some anxiety. I'm concerned. That's where we could really go to a school and bring that testing in and say, this kiddo needs some real accommodations to access school. And that's where we talk about a 504 plan. Because a 504 plan it's under a federal umbrella called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And basically there's this kind of this language that something health-wise or something gets in the way of life activities. And one of those life activities is learning, right? So that's where that piece comes in. But you also see 504 plans for kiddos that have like diabetes or different like health issues,
physical.
also just because they need access to like a refrigerator to keep medicine. They need to be able to take breaks to administer medicine or whatever it is they need. So 504 really kind of covers needed accommodations. Sometimes it can kind of touch on services a little, like Laura and I have had kiddos that have like pretty acute anxiety, and then they'll maybe give a school counselor to check in like a couple of
qualify
times.
For
but like really 504 is much more about this kiddo just needs some accommodations, and that will really help them access school. Right. And it's a less formalized process in the sense that you don't need to go through school's round of testing. And Laura will talk more about that. You can kind of bring in and out. Some schools still want to do their own testing. It's pretty rare, I would say. But they just, you have a doctor's note, you have something that shows something's interfering with the life activity of learning. And that's kind of where 504 plans. And then let's say those accommodations aren't working. It's not enough. This kiddo is still floundering. They hand it over to Laura.
Nice.
So an IEP is really, in order to qualify, you have to demonstrate that you need help accessing the curriculum. And that is generally done through assessments. So the school will do a neuropsychological assessment as well as academic assessments. If there are concerns in other areas, whether it's behavior or speech or OT, PT, they'll also do assessments in those areas. There has to have, in order to qualify an IEP, you have to meet the criteria in terms of needing help in a specific academic area or intellectual area. And in order to do that, your student has to not be within the average range. And I always warn parents about that, because I don't think it should be an average range, because it's a very, very large range.
It is a large range.
Yes, it's because everybody's like, well, 50% is the average, and my student's at 30 or 25,
right.
But that's the acceptable range. So your child has to demonstrate a need in a specific area. And then they can offer services. So assessments drive area of needs. From those areas of needs, the IEP team would develop goals, specific goals for a year. They're always annual goals. For your child to reach. And so those goals would drive services, meaning if you have a speech language goal, whether it's pragmatic, receptive, expressive language, you would have speech language services, depending on, and speech language is the only area that can stand alone. So if your child speech needs, but not academic needs, they still have an IEP. But all other services are considered related services. So they would first need to have a special education need.
To do that.
But then those services are developed, and then we discuss how those services are going to be provided. Sometimes a student can be pulled out for resource support. Sometimes a teacher can push into their class for resource support, keeping in mind that the goal for that student is to remain as much as possible in the general education environment, because that's least restrictive. So that's really how the IEP is developed. And I think districts tend to rush through the assessment process when they're reviewing it with parents. So, parents will receive this 20-page report that is just
overwhelming,
abbreviations, and like there's no pause to say, okay, this is what this means. And so that's a lot of times what I like to do with families, is to review the assessment reports prior to the meeting, just so they have a greater understanding of it, because I know those meetings can be very overwhelming. I have a child with one, and even though this is what I do, I still find it very overwhelming when it's my child.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's really, but anyway, that's the main difference between an IEP and a 504. Is a 504, the student can still access the general education curriculum, but might need some accommodations. An IEP is the student needs specific supports, direct supports, in order to reach that curriculum. So that's really the differentiation. In an IEP, you have goals, specific goals for that student. In a 504, you don't. And you would have direct services, where in a 504, you can, but it's more typical that you would just get the accommodations.
I see.
So
that's a great explanation, both of you. Thank you.
That is the very abbreviated.
Yeah.
Regular people like me don't know stuff like that. So this is awesome.
The other piece is just how they would qualify, I think, for an IEP. Like there's kind of, for I think, like the clientele you're going to be seeing sometimes, like just like there's kind of different, there's like, is it 11, Laura? I always forget, is it 11 or 12? You think that would be in my brain by now? 13? Yeah. I have dyscalculia.
You were close.
I remember numbers. So there you go. But just there's different qualifications. And I think that's the other piece we talk to families a lot about too, of like, okay, based on this assessment result, it seems like they're going to probably qualify under something called like OHI, other health impairment, because that's usually where you kind of see the kiddo with ADHD kind of come in.Maybe they have a little weakness in an academic area, but they're not really accessing curriculum. So they need some more support there. So there's a lot of nuance there too. So that's another reason I think families like to have that support of like, what does this even mean? I really appreciate the work you guys do, because I know family, and firsthand I know a great friend of mine that she went through so much, and it was very hard for her to understand how the system worked and help her daughter, but she did it, so that was great. I'm curious about what comes through the door most for you guys in terms of your clients. What do you see the most? All of it.
I don't think there's any one
specific.
There's not a specific, eligibility, or that the child has. I think one that we're seeing more and more, I would say, would be SLD, which is specific learning disability, which is your dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So I think that is one that has certainly been increasing now that districts are acknowledging that. But having said that, I get lots of parents who say, my child's qualified for SLD, but my child has dyslexia. And so that's also another, that's what the school, can't diagnose.
Yes.
Yeah, so they can say, yes, your child has a specific learning disability. But our clients run, the spectrum, through all of the eligibility criteria, and really through all the ages. Every age, whether it's the preschool level where they're just ready for kindergarten, or in elementary, especially at the 3rd grade level where you're no longer learning to read, you're reading to learn, and that's where I love that. Yeah. You start to see a lot of children who haven't been able to develop their reading, writing skills, whether it's that jump to middle school. It's across the board. I think, there are also some students who manage to hold it together all the way through high school, and then they get to high school and, the wheels kind of
just lose
the bus. That's where I feel like we see kind of that starting around 7th, 8th groups. Mostly 8th grade through high school. Like I got a lot of kids that are showing a lot of signs of anxiety. But if you kind of like pull the curtain back a little bit, and a lot of time with girls, like we see like, oh, there's some like, maybe even some like autism spectrum things going on back there for them. ADHD, because it manifests very differently in girls. They don't get, because they learn how to plug into the systems a little bit better with the ADHD, and not always, but have a little more of that inattentive versus the hyperactive piece. So they kind of sail by, and then they hit that where the systems get overwhelmed because you have 7 different operating systems, and they've been pushing this rock up a hill, but it's been more of this slope. And then all of a sudden it goes like this and they fall to pieces. So it's like, I feel like I get a lot of that. Like
I also find that very interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
School districts are not as knowledgeable when it comes to girls on the spectrum as boys, and they do very, very differently. And so, a lot of my girl students who, are on the spectrum, the school will say, but they're engaged socially. They want those social relations. And that's very typical of a girl on the spectrum, where they want to have friends. They just don't know how to do it. Or they want to build those relationships, but it's just becoming overwhelming, especially as the girls in their class are maturing at a faster rate than they do. So it's very interesting, the differences. And I think a lot of the attention has always been to the boys. on the spectrum, and we're seeing more and more girls, and they do present very differently. So a lot of that is education, educating the team, educating parents about how that
and recognize that, right, and address it. Yeah. And I think also, I mean, we live in a place that academics are number one, and a lot of those kids, because of cultural background, they don't show that they're struggling with, they probably have some learning disabilities. They don't show that because it's not acceptable, right? And unfortunately, we do have clients that we see because of that. With the anxiety and depression is just rising, going up. Going
and
up.
It was increasing drastically prior to COVID, but during COVID, I think that is going to be exponentially at a greater rate than prior.
Yeah, and not to mention what's going to happen when things get to normal, right? We're going to carry that stress with us for a little bit longer than what they say, 18 months. That's not going to happen. What is your positive behavior intervention plan?
We actually, I don't know, Laura, do you want to take this one? Yeah.
Sure. So really, we don't create the intervention plans. We don't create the programs. So it really, again, it depends on the child. It depends on where they are in the school. Depends on what their issues are. Again, our goal is to look at the behaviors or look at the difficulties that child is having in school, and really maximize what they're able to have. So if you have a child who's maybe demonstrating behaviors, but then you've looked at the OT report and they have a lot of sensory needs, it's really to create those wraparound services in terms of, let's look at the sensory, let's look at the behavior, let's look at what we can do to positively reinforce the student. And those can be written as services, or they can also be written in as accommodations. So it really depends on the child, but our goal would be, the behaviors would do, whether they would do a BIP or an FBA, they would study the child, and then we would review it and really maximize
that. Yeah.
What we can do.
That's great.
And it's just, I think it's the learning curve, right? Like sensory integration disorder was not people didn't really understand that. I would say 10 years ago, it definitely wasn't part of the vernacular. And now it's a sensory processing disorder, and just it's changing, and we're learning more and more about that. And what I'm loving is I'm starting to see those, especially in elementary schools, they're starting to build in a sensory diet for kids that need that type of feedback during their day to stay regulated. So that's the type of stuff. It's just sometimes teams just don't have their heads around it. So bringing that in for them of this is what's going on for this kiddo. This is what it feels like for them. This is why you're seeing this dysregulated behavior. Let's give this a shot for a couple of weeks, and let's see if it makes a difference. Yeah.
Right.
And I think sometimes parents hit the wall in terms of behavior plans, where they'll say, well, this really helps at home, but the school said that they can't do it at school. And I think when we have meetings, we'll say, well, yes, you can. And this is how we can make it work within a classroom. Or, I think both of us who are experienced, why don't we try this accommodation? Or why don't you try this in the classroom? Things that maybe the parents haven't thought about or tried, because obviously home and school are very different. Well, right now they're exactly the same, but they're very different. But just on a side note, I think that's what, if there's any silver lining to the distance learning, it's that parents now know their students in both environments. They know them as a child and they know them as a student. And so I really push parents to use that knowledge in those IEP meetings, because now the parent is both the parent and the teacher. And so, it's very different as a parent to try and take data on your child, but that's really what I'm encouraging parents to do. Say, well, how long can they take, attend to a task? What accommodations are you using at home that benefit them? And parents might not even realize that that's an accommodation. It's just something that they do naturally because that's their child. But those are all things that we can go to the team and say, listen, based on the last year, this is something that works and we want to implement it in the classroom. So
Yeah.
You know, I do try and get parents to step back a bit and look at how they are working with their child. They know their child better than anyone else, and now they know how to teach them.
Yeah,
better.
and understand how your child behaves when he's a student, right?
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Do you guys work, or you ever had to work directly with mediators or attorneys?
Yes, more of like when we're kind of passing a case along. Like
Nobody wants to do that, but
yeah, well, actually, it's more like the way we look at our work with our clients is we're going to try and maximize everything we can at that school level, so to speak. So we're going to try and think of everything we can to really get you the best possible situation in your public school. And sometimes that means helping a family make a transition to a non-public school. That's part of what we do too. But then there comes a point where a team just might be an impasse, and the legal road is starting, and that's where we will collaboratively kind of turn over a case to an attorney.
But you will be involved in the whole process.
Well, it's more of I would say handoff. I definitely will pick up a phone and talk to the receiving attorney and be like, here's all my stuff. And I will help them move that case so that it makes a really nice transition. But once we're in that due process, lawyers are involved, that's kind of where we're backed out. I know there's definitely families that are still want to call and talk things through because it just makes them feel better because we've helped them the whole way through it. We're always happy to do that. But
there's also sometimes where you've hit an impasse, the district's saying no, okay, we need to go and get this mediated or go through a due process, and we're not allowed to represent clients. That was a law that was changed. That's right. I wanted to say 3 or 4 years ago now.
Also recently, okay.
Yeah, advocates used to be able to go through the due process with their client. We are no longer allowed to do that. So we will pass the case off to an attorney, and I've had actually most of my cases where they'll go through due process. Normally this is about placement or services. So we'll get the placement or the services that we want. And then the lawyer passes it back to me. And so it's kind of a very fluid, I always say, we know education. Our goal is to create an IEP or a 504 that meets your child's needs. A lawyer knows law. And so they're able to get whatever it is that I feel or Heather feels is necessary for that educational program. But they're not good at developing goals or knowing exactly what services are going to meet your child's needs. So it's a little fluid, but if you're in a meeting, you can't have an advocate and a lawyer. So it's kind of a either or, it's not a both.
No both, okay.
But it can be very fluid in terms of that. Having said that, I think I've only had a handful of cases where we've had to get, and it's normally with specific districts. So it's not specific.
Yeah.
We're not going to name.
Very polite, but it's normally just with specific districts where they've just dig their heels in and say no, even though we know that that's what the child needs. And then they go through the process and we'll say, yes, okay, fine. And then we go back in and we develop the IEP to meet that child's needs. That's kind of the way the system
how it flows. Okay, that's great. And as we end our time together, is there anything else you guys want to add? And I would love if you can also share your information so people can reach out to you.
Absolutely. Well, you just can Google us, Lamborn Advocacy. We're right there, and we'll definitely send information over to with email addresses, phone numbers, and all of that good stuff. I guess my ending thing would just be, I wish sometimes I gotten clients just a little earlier, right? When they were a little earlier in the whole process. You could see if they've gotten to the point where they're really frustrated with their team and and I think if getting in there a little earlier in the process when they were getting the twinges of I'm just not understanding this, I just want somebody to hold my hand, I think it could make the whole process a little more seamless for everybody so it doesn't cause so much stress.
Yeah, recognize something earlier.
Just be able to do a little bit more of an upstream intervention.
That's right. Yeah. Laura,
and
anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I speak to a lot of parents who say, well, we don't want to make the district mad. And I completely understand that. I think most districts, we've worked with most of the districts in the Greater Bay Area, they know our style, and lots of districts will say thank you for attending because they know we're not going to be contentious. They know we're not going to make the situation worse. They know that we're there with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of experience to help the client, which is the child, but you know, through the family. But I think that's one of the things that I always try and just tell parents, which is, this is your child. You get one chance at the educational process with your child.
Mm-hmm.
If your child has special needs, you are entitled to ask for them. The district knows that. So it's not anything that is going to anger the district. They're not going to be punitive. They're not going to be, you know, nasty outcomes as a result. And I think also Heather and I are very transparent. If we, you know, have a client and they say, we want this, we're very honest and saying, this is, you know, we probably aren't going to be able to get that, and this is why, but we could ask for this and ask for that.
I love that. Yeah.
Just as if a client comes and says, well, we just want to get this, and we look at the, you know, the child and say, well, you actually need to ask for this. And so, you know, it's not a contentious issue at all. And I think sometimes parents are concerned that there will be retribution.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And that's just not our style, and that's not our reputation.
You just want to navigate the waters smoothly,
Right.
right? And take your clients there.
Again, you know, our big push is parent education. Obviously, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what to ask for if you don't know what your options are. So, you know, that is our goal. And I also just want to say, I put our website and both of our emails in the chat so people can access our information there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And as for us, our philosophy here in Therapy Works is very simple. We are better together. And like you guys, everything we do is in support of our community. And we understand sometimes making the first call, taking the first step isn't always easy, right? But we're here to help. And I really appreciate your time today. And if you want to know more about us, visit mytherapyworks.com. Laura and Heather, I really appreciate your time today. That was super informative. I love it. And I hope we will do this again in the future. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you as well.
Okay. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you.